Okay, the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions will come to order. And let me begin by thanking our witnesses who are experts on workforce development and practitioners who are working hard to put American workers and communities across this country on a path to higher wages and more fruitful careers. And we thank you very much for what you're doing. We're here today to talk about a very serious issue, and that is the need to reauthorize and expand the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act, also known here in D.C. as WIOA. In 2022, WIOA provided career and training services to nearly 300,000 adults, 212,000 dislocated workers, 37,000 youth, and 2.3 million individuals through employment service programs to connect people with good jobs. It also supported literacy, training, and basic education for 1.1 million adults. It supports a network of 2,400 American job centers so that Americans in any community across this country can walk into a center to get help looking for a job, enroll a training program at a local community college, or get referrals to food assistance or other supportive services. WIOA also funds national programs that serve incarcerated individuals. That's something I want to be talking about today because our rate of recidivism is off the charts. Workers in tribal and migrant communities and youth, such as through Youth Build, which provides valuable training to 5,000 opportunity youth through building affordable housing. It has been 10 years since Congress passed the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act. In those 10 years, this country has experienced, as we all know, some monumental changes. The COVID-19 pandemic altered the landscape of what jobs are available and forced many workers to rapidly shift careers, sometimes for lower wages. Advancements in technology have displaced workers, with one estimate showing the current shifts toward automation could put up to 39 million Americans out of work by 2030. Employers continue to ask more from workers and in many cases contribute less to their well-being. Of the 30 fastest growing occupations in this country, 24 require more than a high school diploma. Let me just say this as some down-to-earth realities that I've experienced. I went to a high school in South Central Vermont a few months ago, and I walked into the school, and there was a level of excitement that I had not anticipated. Unlike many other schools, kids were really happy to be in school. Why was that? Well, there was a program in the school that allowed seniors to go out and get jobs in the community half-day while they were in school the other half-day. They were making $20 an hour doing important work. Employers wanted their labor. And they came back to school. They were motivated, much more motivated than they had previously been. They felt better about their academics. So it was a twofer. Did better academically, earning a living for their working-class families. Second thing that I would like to bring up and hope to discuss later is through an earmark, I got some money for Vermont prisons. It shocked me to know, I don't know, Senator Cassidy, if others know this, I kind of had assumed this was a no-brainer, but it wasn't. There are prisons all over America, including in Vermont, where you're in jail, you don't even have any educational opportunity. You're sitting there watching TV, doing whatever you're doing, getting angrier, more frustrated, and the rate of recidivism that we have in this country is extraordinarily high. So we're spending, I don't know what is in Vermont, $60,000, $70,000 a year to lock people up. And then a good portion of them come back because we haven't given them the job training, we haven't given them the education. So we brought some money into the state, working with the community colleges where they're now doing educational programs where the prisoners are very motivated, is my understanding. It's working quite well. And by the way, we also got the same program for the prison guards and their families to get credits for community colleges as well. So bottom line is, you got millions of kids in school today who they're good with their hands, they want to go out, they want to make a living, they don't have the training to do that. And I think we got to figure out how to do that. We're spending huge amounts of money locking people up in this country, and they leave prison without the skills they need to succeed in the civilian world. So those are some of the issues that concern me. Look forward to discussing you with them, and thanks for being here. Senator Cassidy?
Thank you, Chairman Sanders. There's about 8 million job openings in the United States, and the unemployment rate is low, but so is the workforce participation. That's a bad sign. To put it in context, about 37% of working-age adults nationwide are unemployed and not looking for work. Again, that's not good. Idle hands are a devil's workshop is the old proverb, but people do better if they are gainfully employed. So many Americans are not receiving job training because of a workforce development program which is just not working well. Current federal workforce funding prioritizes bloating government bureaucracy less in investing in worker skill. That is why reauthorizing and improving the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Grant, WIOA, always reminds me of one of those songs from Lion King, WIOA. Anyway, WIOA is so important. WIOA funds programs assisting Americans in obtaining crucial job skills as well as to connect job seekers with employment activities. But Congress has failed to reauthorize WIOA since it expired in 2020. I thank the chair for collaborating in this. This is an important step this hearing in improving WIOA and reauthorizing. It is long overdue. I hope that what we learned today will culminate in a bipartisan committee markup before the August recess. I also want to highlight Republican colleagues for the work to improve WIOA, including Senators Tuberville, Mullen, Marshall, and Braun, all in this committee, Budd, Romney, Collins, all in this committee, who have developed legislation worthy of this committee's consideration. I appreciate their work and look forward to hearing more about their bills today. When Congress fails to reauthorize programs, we miss out on the ability to improve them to help meet the needs of a modern workforce and of employers. We have the opportunity now to increase options for training and skills development so workers can properly enter, re-enter, and remain in an ever-changing workforce. To achieve this goal, we must, 1, direct more funding to training and allow states to innovate to best serve workers and employers. 2, improve the eligible training provider list, making it easier for workers to connect to a more quality workforce training providers. And 3, allow states the flexibility to implement innovative workforce development models that meet workers where they are and get them better connected with employers. This flexible model, by the way, has been very successful in Senator Romney's home state of Utah, and it's something that my state of Louisiana is seeking to implement. Lastly, we need to increase transparency and accountability of WIOA programs for improving employment outcomes, including earnings, to ensure that they are best serving workers. These are just a few of the policies the committee should consider. Again, I appreciate the chair for calling this hearing. I look forward to this discussion on how to improve WIOA to benefit working Americans, to benefit us all. With that, I yield.
Thank you, Senator Cassidy. I would mention to members that in this new room, apparently the timer is broken, and they're trying to fix it right now. So I will gently bang at 5, after your 5 minutes. See, it's a senator's dream. The timer is broken, they can go on for hours. But
I suggest we put on our iPhone and start, counting down.
We thank our witnesses for being here to discuss this very important issue. Our first witness is Ms. Taylor White, the Director of the Program for Advanced Youth Apprenticeship and Post-Secondary Pathways for Youth at New America. In this role, she directs a network that supports over 70 apprenticeship programs across the country through grants and technical assistance to expand access to apprenticeships as a high-quality post-secondary option for youth. Ms. White, thanks a lot for being here.
Good morning, Chairman Sanders.
Speak a little bit closer to the mic.
Okay. I thought the whole thing might not be working. There we go. All right, good morning, Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Cassidy, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify today. I am, as you shared, Taylor White, the Director of Post-Secondary Pathways for Youth at New America and the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship, or PIA. Since 2018, PIA has led a national network of dynamic public-private partnerships working to build earn and learn pathways that connect young people with training and work experiences they need to land jobs and work towards careers. Now 70 members strong, the network has provided powerful examples of how WIOA makes a difference in the lives of young people. It's an honor to be here today to share recommendations on how we can enhance and expand these efforts. Okay, sorry, I'll pull it closer to me. There we go. Sure thing. So it's an honor to be here today, thank you. It's a difficult time to be a young American. Persistent inequities in our systems of education and work limit access and opportunity based on gender, income, disability, citizenship status, and most starkly, race. Economic mobility, long considered a hallmark of American society, has been declining for decades. With or without a college degree, a young adult today is less likely to earn as much as their parents. Basic necessities like healthcare, housing, and education that were affordable to previous generations are far more expensive today, making the transition to adulthood much harder for young people to navigate. Currently, over 12% of Americans between the ages of 16 and 24 are disconnected from both education and the labor market. That's roughly 4.5 million young people. Rates of disconnection are highest among Native American, Black, and Latino youth. Young men are more likely to be disconnected than young women. And these so-called opportunity youth are twice as likely as their connected peers to have grown up in poverty and 3 times as likely to have a disability. A robust body of research demonstrates that youth disconnection is associated with lower levels of educational attainment and increased rates of substance abuse, physical and mental illness, and criminal activity. The individual and social costs of youth disconnection are enormous. Our public workforce system plays a critical role in identifying these young people and helping them access education, training, work experiences, and the supports they need to stay connected or re-engage. Each year, WIOA-funded programs such as Job Corps, Youth Build, and the myriad local programs supported by Title I youth dollars provide training and services to roughly 200,000 youth, a majority of whom are neither working nor in school. But the number of youth served through WIOA is a shockingly small fraction of those who need support to access jobs and the education and training they need to succeed in them. By failing to serve this population of youth in much greater numbers, we squander an opportunity to harness the potential of more than 4 million Americans who are at the very beginning of their working lives. This is unacceptable. The most important recommendation I can offer today to this committee is a simple one. We must substantially increase the federal investment in youth programming through WIOA to a level that is commensurate with the scale of the barriers young people are facing. Beyond that, however, there are other changes that I believe would improve the workforce system's ability to deliver positive outcomes for young people. For example, I believe Congress should take steps to reduce barriers to cooperation between the public workforce system and other youth-serving systems to reduce disconnection from school and ensure that when students do drop out, information can be shared to identify and re-engage them quickly in the workforce system. Anything we can do to reduce the time that young people remain disconnected will help. Simplifying co-enrollment and continuing self-attestation are 2 other ways we can do this through WIOA. Cross-system cooperation would also be greatly aided by improved data system and enhanced data sharing flexibilities. More granular data on program dimensions, training provider performance, and longer-term program outcomes would also help state and local leaders make informed decisions about how to use their resources for the best possible results. To make this possible, Congress should invest in state and local data infrastructure and promote cross-system data alignment. Research has shown that early career experiences such as internships, apprenticeships, and jobs that pay good wages can have positive effects on future earnings outcomes. Under WIOA, the workforce system has placed more young people in these experiences with positive results. To expand these opportunities, Congress should establish a dedicated work experience fund that provides additional resources to programs that meet a set of quality criteria. For example, eligible programs should include a training component, lead to credentials, and provide a clear next step, either to further training or directly to a job. And whether or not they qualify for the fund, Congress should require youth work experience provided through WIOA to be paid if it lasts longer than 2 weeks. Finally, Congress should preserve and expand the supportive services available through WIOA to address the needs of today's youth, including mental health issues. WIOA supportive services can provide a measure of stability and dignity to young people so they can focus on improving their futures rather than worrying about how to buy a uniform for work, if they can afford treatment for a painful tooth, or paying the rent. For too many young adults in America today, the future is bright, but the path to get there is long, expensive, and hard to navigate. The public workforce system helps some of America's most vulnerable young workers get on their feet and onto a path towards economic security. But we can do better for them and for all young people, and we need to, not just for their sake, but for the sake of our communities and our future economy as well. An ambitious approach to WIOA reauthorization is a good start. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. White, thank you very much. Our next witness is Dr. David Bradley, our Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy at Jobs for the Future. Prior to this role, David worked at the Congressional Research Service as a specialist in labor economics, focusing on labor issues and federal workforce development policies. Dr. Bradley?
Good morning, Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Cassidy, and members of the Senate Help Committee. My name is David Bradley. I'm a Senior Director for Workforce Policy at Jobs for the Future, which is a national nonpartisan nonprofit organization that has worked for more than 40 years to drive change in America's workforce and education systems. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and thank you for your leadership on this important issue. My remarks today are going to focus on three areas. One, why reauthorization now? And what are the major characteristics of WIOA, the current system? And finally, a few recommendations for improving the system. So why does WIOA need to be reauthorized now? I'm sure my fellow panelists are going to give some additional reasons, but I would highlight, as the ranking member pointed out, there are more than 8 million job openings, and the number of unemployed is lower than that. Employers do face difficulty finding skilled workers. In addition, there's persistent difficulty for individuals with barriers to employment in attaining quality jobs. There's going to be an expected increased demand for skilled workers, in part through the investments from the Infrastructure, Chips and Science, and Inflation Reduction Act. Since WIOA was enacted in 2014, there's been a movement towards a skills-based employment ecosystem, which has not been fully incorporated into WIOA. Finally, there's new and constantly evolving technologies that allow for new methods of training delivery and the use of technologies such as AI and job matching. Without focused investments, we could miss an opportunity to increase competitiveness and economic advancement for all. Let me talk a little bit about history and characteristics of WIOA. WIOA was enacted in 2014, and I want to go through some of the defining elements of the system that we have now. WIOA is designed to be demand-driven. That is, it's supposed to be responsive to local conditions and employers' demands through more than 500 local workforce areas. WIOA emphasizes coordination and alignment through such mechanisms as required unified state planning, so that programs are supposed to demonstrate that they're working together. WIOA provides local control. Local workforce boards, for the most part, are authorized to determine the specific mix of services and types of training. WIOA provides central points of service through the one-stop delivery system with more than 2,000 American job centers throughout the country. WIOA also provides universal access to career services and has a priority of service for training services to individuals with low incomes and others in need of significant skills training. WIOA emphasizes certain workforce development strategies such as sector partnerships and career pathways that have evidence-based outcomes behind them. WIOA also emphasizes consumer choice, primarily through its system of individual training accounts. WIOA has a performance accountability system with 6 main indicators of outcomes, and these are common across all titles of WIOA. And finally, WIOA provides business services, including places where employers can go to match with skilled workers and where the workforce system can provide needed services to business, such as on-the-job and customized training plans. Even with these elements, WIOA has not fully realized its goals. One problem is funding. In FY23, programs and activities in the 3 major formula programs were funded at just over $3 billion. This is about the same amount that it's been funded since 2000, which is an inflation-adjusted drop of about 50%. So what can be done to improve the system? One area would be to modernize the way people navigate the labor market and skills training, more robust career navigation, more strategies like competency-based education and prior learning assessments to help people bring their experiences and translate that into a better labor market outcomes. Another suggestion is to invest in evidence-based programs that focus on the skill needs of employers. And there are several evidence-based programs. We have sector strategies, career pathways, apprenticeship, reentry programs. Improving WIOA participant outcomes could also be a result of reforming the performance system to encourage longer-term engagement rather than shorter, in and out and onto a job. There's also room for improvement in the quality control mechanisms for training providers. This is the eligible training provider list. And finally, encouraging a focus on job quality so that people who go through the system end up in a good job. JFF urges leaders in Congress to act and create a workforce system that works for all, where there are no dead ends to economic opportunity. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Senator Cassidy, do you want to introduce your witness?
Yes, I will. I'll introduce a good friend and someone I've learned a lot with, Dr. Monty Sullivan, who has served as the president of the Louisiana Community and Technical College System since 2014, before then Chancellor of Delgado Community College in New Orleans, and a fierce leader for Louisiana's 12 community colleges and the 150,000 students who flow through their doors. Their mantra is "Start here, go anywhere," a fitting theme for today's hearing. Dr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Senator. Good morning, Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Cassidy, members of the Help Committee. I'm Monty Sullivan, President of the Louisiana Community and Technical College System. I also serve as President of Rebuilding America's Middle Class, which is a coalition of community colleges from across the nation. I appreciate the opportunity to address the committee this morning. Our country is facing a significant challenge in educating and training our workforce. Our talent development system, largely funded by WIOA and Pell programs, is simply not keeping pace with the modern economy and the needs of our employers. Today, we have over 80 million, 1 in 3 working-age Americans with a high school diploma or less. Imagine a high school diploma or less. Today's jobs and the jobs of the future require more than a high school diploma, very simply. Without a significant overhaul of the nation's workforce system, these 80 million working-age adults are doomed to be frozen out of the American middle class. 2 data points. 1 in 3 working-age Americans are not participating in the labor force, as you heard previously. In Louisiana, 40% of our working-age adults are not engaged in the workforce. Point 2, a decreasing share of the American population is part of the middle class. That's part of what we believe is the American dream. 61% of Americans were considered part of the middle class in 1971. In 2023, that number dropped to 51%. This sobering data demonstrates that millions of Americans lack the education and training they need to punch their ticket to the middle class. Now's the time for the committee to lead the way in strengthening and reforming WIOA and other federal education and training programs. The current WIOA system is simply not meeting the needs of employers seeking to find workers with industry-based specific skills. This is evidenced by the fact that there are 8.1 million jobs that are vacant today. Building an effective workforce system requires our business partners to be at the table. I'm especially proud to be with you today alongside Mr. Matthew Dickerson, an incredible industry partner committed to the long-term success of our people. WIOA is largely failing to meet the needs of many of our workers who have families or single parents or others responsibilities, including going to school. Even with wraparound support services, however, these students need flexible classes and programs that allow them to complete. Very few have the time to complete an associate degree. Most, instead, need to get into the college, complete a short-term certification, an industry-based certification, get out and go to work. That's when the role of the employer becomes really important to help bring them into the future of the economy. While the data is stark, we're ready for change in Louisiana. Governor Jeff Landry recently established the Workforce and Social Services Reform Task Force. We're already seeing momentum build behind the notion of eliminating silos and fostering collaboration. But for these efforts to really work, we're going to need your help. The integration of our colleges into the WIOA structure has already taken place with institutions like South Louisiana Community College that house the one-stops on their campuses across 8 parishes in South Central Louisiana. In addition to that, you also have relationships with our Louisiana Workforce Commission and institutions like Sewella Technical Community College that extend workforce services into communities that would not have those services under different circumstances. The committee has an awesome opportunity before you to reauthorize and change the path of America. First, recommendation, WIOA must fund more training. You've heard that before. In 2022, less than 200,000 individuals received direct training as a result of WIOA. Imagine the numbers, 8 million vacancies, 200,000 people trained. The appropriations for WIOA formula programs must be increased, no doubt, but a much greater portion of those funds must be used for training services. Herein is an opportunity to leverage the nation's more than 1,000 community colleges and the local workforce boards to create more accessible and effective workforce training systems. Second, adult education serves more people than all of the other titles of WIOA combined. Adult education. We must fund adult education. This is a forgotten population for many of us. But the solution is not simply more money. Adult education should be integrated with training and allows individuals to gain a sustained career. Yes, young people are important, but if we don't train their parents, what happens to the young person when they go home? Third, we need to empower workers with information about which post-secondary education training options are best for them. In Louisiana, we developed a star rating system that looks at demand for the occupation as well as income, that helps individuals to make decisions about their future and their career. I also urge the committee to require the use of earnings and employment data in demonstrating, in determining providers, programs that are available to the people of our area. Lastly, thanks to the committee for your keen focus on both of the nation's talent development funds, WIOA and the federal Pell Program. I would be remiss if I did not urge the committee to give consideration to the passage of Workforce Pell. Expand Pell to allow America the opportunity to be trained and educated, to go to work and be productive as a part of this economy. Even with all of the WIOA improvements that we've discussed, that I've outlined here today, WIOA alone simply will not get it done. In closing, I'd like to ask to imagine the countless Americans trapped on the outside of this economy, seeing the successes of others. The erosion of the middle class has far-reaching implications for the people, our communities, and our democracy. The committee has a chance to change lives this Congress by reimagining market-responsive, customer-focused workforce training system. I cannot wait to see what we will build together. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you, Dr. Sullivan. Our next witness is Dr. Lisa Bly-Jones, the CEO of the Chicago Jobs Council, where she leads the organization's capacity-building member engagement and policy advocacy work. She has previously led workforce development projects for public and private entities by developing occupational and sectoral training programs that convene partners from across the workforce system. Dr. Jones, thanks for being with us.
Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Cassidy, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the importance of—
Is your mic on? The red light there?
Yep.
Okay, then talk a little bit closer into the mic, please.
Okay. How's that?
Better.
Okay. Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Cassidy, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the importance of upgrading our public workforce system. My name is Dr. Lisa Bly-Jones, and I am CEO of the Chicago Jobs Council, a workforce development intermediary in Chicago, Illinois, that develops tools, resources, and offers training to build capacity for workforce organizations and set priorities for policy advocacy and member engagement. I am honored to be here today to contribute to the conversation. Our work at CJC prioritizes policies that build transformative relationships between people and systems, focusing on equitable access, providing quality jobs, and removing funding obstacles that inhibit progress. WIOA reauthorization offers a critical opportunity to scale what is working in Illinois and supplement the work we are doing to ensure that workers can access the skills they need for the jobs which businesses are hiring for. First, Congress should fund WIOA commensurate with need. When factoring inflation, Congress has steadily cut investments in workforce programs over the past 20 years. While I recognize this committee does not appropriate funding, it plays a key role in advocating for the funding levels that should be set. In recent polling commissioned by National Skills Coalition, 82% of voters indicated support for increasing government funding for skills training. Given the public support for increasing funding and growing demand, WIOA should include authorized funding levels that match current and future needs. This committee can also support expanding Pell Grant eligibility to students enrolled in short-term, high-quality training programs. Many students enrolled in these programs would qualify for federal higher education grant aid based on income, if not for program eligibility limitations. Secondly, Congress should support industry or sector partnerships that help businesses engage in the public workforce system and career pathways that ensure worker and student success. WIOA requires a stronger connection to employers. Each local community has a local economy, and employers in those communities are best able to identify industry trends and skills and training needs. It's critical to involve employers on the front end and establish industry or sector partnerships that bring together local businesses and other stakeholders to develop workforce strategies and provide training and services that supports area demand. This is especially valuable for small and medium-sized businesses. Industry partnerships can also support access to career pathways that connect progressive levels of education, training, supportive services, and credentials throughout an individual's career. Although WIOA requires states and local workforce boards to support partnerships, it does not contain targeted funding. WIOA reauthorization should establish grants to develop and maintain industry and sector partnerships and separately support career pathways development. Additionally, Congress should support participant needs to ensure they can enter, succeed in, and become employed after quality training programs. The House passed ASWA requires that 50% of funding be allocated to training, presenting two challenges for Illinois. First, it prioritizes cost over participants. If there is a minimum measure to ensure more workers are getting training, then the proposal should include the flexibility states need to define what that measurement is. Second, it neglects support services and career navigation. For workers with the greatest economic need, the distinction between entering training and completing is usually unexpected costs associated with childcare, transportation, or a challenge with career navigation. Career coaching and navigation services are increasingly important for advancing equity and addressing barriers. A 2021 CJC report identified that 6 months or a year is not enough time for people who have experienced trauma, such as mental illness, homelessness, or incarceration, to seamlessly transition back into the workforce. Congress should focus on ensuring that there are sufficient resources to support training expenditures, including all related costs, support services, and staff assistance. CJC also partners with reentry organizations working on behalf of justice-involved individuals to ensure that they do not face permanent punishments because of criminal records. WIOA must similarly connect justice-impact individuals to work because we know there's dignity in work. Finally, Congress should capture data on participant outcomes and success in the future. WIOA should disaggregate training performance outcomes by race, ethnicity, gender, and other demographic or socioeconomic factors, and expand performance indicators to include quality credential attainment, longer employment and wage outcomes, occupation-specific job placement, and measures on job quality. I am grateful for the opportunity to provide testimony today, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Senator Cassidy, you want to introduce your next panelist?
Yes, I will. Really privileged to represent, to introduce Mr. Matthew Dickerson, who represents all aspects of what we're discussing. He's the Business Development and Strategy Officer for Mid-South Extrusion, a growing employer in Northeast Louisiana, so the employee side. He's with associations for example, specifically the Monroe, Louisiana Chamber of Commerce in the Northeast and the Northeast Louisiana Manufacturing Alliance and Consortium. And lastly, he's been a teacher, bringing classroom experience from career teaching and developing career and technical education in the Monroe City schools. Mr. Dickerson, thanks for being here.
Chair Sanders, Ranking Member Cassidy, members of the committee, and my fellow panelists. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you today about the pressing need to build a strong and adaptable workforce in our nation. I'm Matthew Dickerson, Business Development and Strategy Officer for Mid-South Extrusion in Monroe, Louisiana. I've been deeply involved in workforce development and have over a decade of experience in various roles such as educator, career and technical education supervisor, small business owner, and now executive of a rapidly expanding and innovative plastics manufacturing company in Monroe. I'm also honored to serve on the Louisiana Workforce and Social Services Reform Task Force appointed by the governor. We aim to create a plan enabling individuals to transition from poverty to prosperity by coordinating our workforce and social service systems more effectively. Like many industries, one of our challenges is recruiting and employing individuals with the necessary and essential skills in reading, writing, math, and then the specialized skills to run our production facility. Our goal is to deliver high-quality products to our customers, which requires a skilled workforce. Our projected growth and the expansion of our production capabilities hinge on our ability to not only develop our current workforce, but also recruit individuals who can produce that high-quality product. I'm pleased to report significant progress in this effort in Northeast Louisiana, despite being one of the most impoverished regions in our country, through two sector partnerships in healthcare and manufacturing. As chair of the Northeast Louisiana Manufacturers Alliance and Consortium, I'm proud to say that business and industry leaders are taking real action to break the cycle of generational poverty through the development of education and workforce programs that align with our region's available careers. I believe it's time for industry to take the lead in discussions on workforce development. We must stop being passive consumers of the workforce system and complaining about the quality of the product. This is our opportunity to lead the discussion and produce ideal candidates for our available positions. We have dedicated extensive time to collaborating with our K-12 partners, the community and technical college system, our local universities, our local workforce boards, and various community organizations to address the constantly evolving needs of industry. Collaboration with industry leaders is crucial to developing a partnership-driven process for enhancing workforce development and addressing public and private sector needs. There's been a shift where businesses increasingly shoulder the burden of training, a role traditionally filled by community partners who now struggle with adapting to industry changes due to policy and resource limitations. I believe the sector partnership model is a practical accountability framework, with industry partners at its core expressing their challenges and the needs of the community partners collaborating on how to leverage dollars to address those needs successfully. However, a significant challenge has been the disorganization of resources, leading to inefficiencies in funding allocation and service provision, and failing to effectively meet employers' needs. By increasing investment in training and optimizing the utilization of existing supportive services, we can enhance the ability of individuals to move from poverty to prosperity more efficiently. Local and state control over funding for workforce development programs is crucial to enhancing strategic effectiveness and ensuring successful outcomes. These agencies possess a deep understanding of their region's distinct challenges and opportunities, granting them the ability to customize workforce development programs that precisely cater to the unique needs of both employers and employees. This level of control offers the adaptability and agility needed to keep up with new industry trends and changes in the job market, where a universal federal approach is just not practical. Through this targeted and localized investment approach, we can cultivate a more robust, resilient workforce that can uphold our nation's economic growth and competitiveness with confidence and optimism. In conclusion, as we stand at the crossroads of essential economic and social reform, our collective action or inaction will determine the future of workforce development in our nation. Our advancements in Northeast Louisiana showcase the tangible benefits of industry-led initiatives and the power of collaboration with educational and community partners. We must recognize that the prosperity of our industries and the well-being of our communities are inseparably linked. I urge Congress to consider directing significant investments to industry-led, partnership-driven workforce development strategies that realistically address the skills gap and effectively utilize resources to empower individuals toward economic prosperity. Thank you for your attention and for considering this important step towards building a strong and sustainable workforce.
Thank you, Mr. Dickerson. This is an area I am not all that knowledgeable about, so I'm going to ask you some dumb bunny questions, all right? What I do know is that the recidivism rate for people in prison is absurdly high. People go to jail without the skills they need to earn a good living in the workforce, and too often they come out without those skills, without the education. What are you doing with regard to that so that people come out ready to be integrated into the economy so they don't go back to jail? What should we be doing? Who wants to take a shot at that one?
I'll certainly jump in. Thank you for the question. I think it's an incredibly important one. One of the keys here is recidivism in Louisiana, at least. We see about 2/3 of the people that have been incarcerated come back in some form or fashion. What we learned over the last 6 or 8 years in programs that specifically aimed at recidivism was we could reduce that recidivism rate to about 1/3 by ensuring that an individual that walks out of that facility has the skills when they leave to make a good living. It is a game changer for this population.
All right, let me ask you this.
Yes, sir.
What you're saying is obvious, it is common sense. Nobody in the world would disagree.
Sure.
And I don't think the rates are much different in Vermont than they are in Louisiana. Sure. What are we doing about it? I mean, do we have in this country, I mean, you help me, I don't know the answer to this. Are prisons providing the education and the job training that inmates need in order to live productive lives after prison? Yes, no, I mean, help me out on that one. Who wants to jump in? Dr. Dickinson, did you want to?
I'll jump in.
All right.
I'll jump in. I'll say a couple of things. One, I'll say that I think across the country, there are relationships with community colleges that actually deliver programming in prisons across the country. So that's one aspect of getting the training.
Are they working well, do you think?
I think there's always a need for more resources. Are they getting the skills that they deliver at that time? I would say yes. Okay. Are those the skills that employers actually need when the individual is released, depending on where that individual is released to, the community that that individual returns to, the additional supportive services that are needed to keep the individual working, secure housing, the supportive services to get back and forth to their employment, their place of employment. It's the entire wraparound service.
Right.
We're talking about systemic issues. So that.
Right.
Okay.
I would trust that we're all in agreement that it is insane to spend whatever it is, $60,000, $80,000 a year locking somebody up, when for less money we can try to educate them, give them the training they need to become productive citizens. All right, let's work on that together. All right, second issue in a broad sense. Young person graduates high school, gets training, becomes an electrician, becomes a plumber, probably makes a higher income than somebody with a BA in today's economy, all right? You got millions of kids sitting in school right now who are not for whatever reason, not academically inclined, bored. What are we doing? Give me good examples of what we are doing to say to those kids, you can go out and earn a living, get the training you need to do enormously important work. Desperately need plumbers, electricians, carpenters, you name it, we need them. Give me some success stories about what we're doing to address the workforce needs of America and provide decent income for our workers. Who wants to jump in on that one? Ms. White?
I'm happy to respond to that, Senator Sanders. Thank you. So your question started by asserting that the young person in the example has graduated from high school. And one of the things I'll note real quickly about WIOA is that the requirement that 75% of youth funds go to out-of-school youth. So there's a smaller portion in WIOA funding that would go to your enrolled high school student for these programs. Nonetheless, some of the recommendations that have been given about aligning systems, I think matters here. Many of the youth apprenticeship programs that we support around the country are combining paid work experience, CTE coursework at community colleges and other training providers as well, with mentorship so that young people are getting a head start on their training while they're in high school, much like the program that you mentioned at the beginning of your remarks. These are programs that currently can receive funding through the Department of Labor if they are registered and compete for grants. There are also a number of states that have adopted definitions and funding streams that leverage WIOA and public education funding to support the growth and expansion of these programs. And it's early days for a lot of them. We don't have a system around it. There are a few states that do have well-developed systems of exactly what you're talking about. I would point to Wisconsin as one that has had a really robust youth apprenticeship system for about 30 years. There's a lot of demand for these programs, I would say, from young people. One thing I would love to see is more folks like Mr. Dickerson who are willing and interested in collaborating with these systems and taking a chance on young people.
Good. Thank you. Senator Cassidy.
Hey, I'll start with Dr. Sullivan. Dr. Sullivan, keep your answers tight because I got a bunch of questions. Sure. Okay. No wrong door. Can you elaborate? I know it started in Utah, but we can't do it unless we get additional authorities. And by the way, for the record, I'd like to enter a letter from my governor, Jeff Landry, ask unanimous consent to enter this letter expressing support for the one-door option in the reauthorization. Without objection. Describe that for the audience and why it's important.
The one-door approach really brings together all of the resources to ensure that the employer, the individual that needs to be trained, whoever the participant might be, enters one door, has one opportunity, resources are pulled together. You heard Mr. Dickerson talk about the array of resources that are there, but they are not aligned in a way that really pinpoint and solve the problem. The one-door approach attempts to take all of those services, yes, the part that's from WIOA, but also portions from our Department of Family and Child Services or from our Department of Health to ensure an individual has a broad array of services for themselves while they're being trained. That one-door approach
My understanding is
an
that Utah did this. They've had the best program. Yes. It was grandfathered in, but everybody else needs authorization specific to allow us to do what Utah does.
Absolutely. Utah's is a classic example. I think every state in the nation should be looking at Utah for this reason.
Yeah, Mitt Romney thinks so too, but that's Romney. Mr. Dickerson, we're attempting to modernize this program. I understand that even in Northeast Louisiana, relatively small in terms of population, there's multiple boards you have to work with. Yes. Can you kind of speak, because this seems to be an area where some of the dollars go instead of the training. Yeah. You as an employer, can you describe the difficulties in working with these multiple boards? Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you for the question. Secondly, there is a real challenge when it comes to utilizing the funds that are available to employers, and it's to the approach of there's a lot of different agencies, there are a lot of different organizations, and they all have a little bit of money. But when it comes to employer needs and specifically trying to train a large amount of employees at one time, there's not enough funding with one individual organization to be able to support that. And so we have 2 local workforce boards in our region, one for our rural representation and one in Ouachita Parish. And they have to work together, which they do, but it does create challenges when you start trying to move money and work within funding streams for those.
So are you proposing that if they were combined, there'd be more money to provide the training?
I think a coordination of funding is a strong recommendation from business and industry.
And is it difficult for the small business to navigate interacting with more than one board, or is it no, once you've figured out one board, you've figured out all boards?
Not necessarily. They're all unique in some of their ways. Obviously, the structure is the same, but there's a lot of business leaders that I've met with that had no idea the resources that were available to them through public funding until they started coming to our sector partnership meetings and other events.
So in a sense, just like there should be no wrong door for the prospective employee, there should be no wrong door for the employer.
Yes, sir.
But that's not worked out as well.
That's right, but that is the work of the task force at the state level that we're looking at, is to coordinate those resources.
Dr. Sullivan, currently the eligible training provider list, difficult to navigate for workers and providers who want to provide training. And I get a sense that red tape is keeping good providers from good providers out and workers not getting the tools they need. In a sense, how much is it going to cost? What's the financial aid? What's the format? And most importantly, their expected earnings. Please discuss the current challenges of the eligible training provider list.
Yeah, I think the thank you for the question. Eligible training provider list really should be developed based upon the question of what value can the provider bring to people and to business partners. If we start with that in mind, I think we can certainly make use of the data that we have from years looking back at that provider, the training programs, and make sure that we're maximizing value for people.
With that, I yield.
Senator Hassan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Cassidy, and thank you for the witnesses for joining us today. Investing in workers' skills and training is an investment in our country's economy and our global competitiveness. So I'm pleased that this committee is engaging in a bipartisan reauthorization of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and I look forward to continuing to collaborate with my colleagues on this important effort. To Dr. Bradley, Senators Young, Collins, Kane, and I co-lead the Bipartisan Gateway to Careers Act, which would invest in career pathway partnerships. These partnerships bring together businesses, workforce development organizations, and higher education programs to ensure that training services are meeting the real-time needs of their employers. Dr. Bradley, can you speak to the strength of the career pathway partnership model and why it should be a focus of WIOA reauthorization?
Yes, thank you very much, Senator. You've hit on an incredibly important component of workforce development that we feel is necessary to both maintain its role in WIOA and increase its role in WIOA. Career pathways, as you know, clearly articulate the education and training required for each occupational level in a given industry. Delivers training in combination with academic and non-academic supportive services. And career pathway are generally intentionally allow earners to exit and re-enter the program as needed. Now, to your point about why is it important, there's strong evidence that shows that programs that employ these tenets of career pathways result in strong positive impacts on credential completion rates, employment, long-term earnings. When you're talking about a system that is not exactly flush with resources, any programs that deliver evidence-based results are a vital component in WIOA.
Thank you so much. Dr. Sullivan, community colleges are also critical partners in the workforce development system. For example, the Community College System of New Hampshire does important work to help Granite Staters earn high-quality credentials through its Early College at Your High School program, which has dual enrollment programming at more than 100 high schools across our state. We should support community colleges in WIOA reauthorization by, one, codifying the Strengthening Community Colleges Grants Program, and also by encouraging the co-location of American Job Centers on community college campuses. Dr. Sullivan, how else can we support community colleges through this reauthorization effort?
Look, I think you've named two that are incredibly important. I want to build upon the career pathways notion because I think there's an opportunity here to redefine what many of us think about community colleges. So much of what we have developed in Louisiana has been this model and notion that students need to complete the initial industry-based certification, the initial certificate, in order to be able to go to work. The rest of their education is largely driven by an employer who is willing to provide tuition reimbursement. So instead of an employer hiring someone at the completion of an associate degree, now they're hiring someone with skills and allowing that individual to be trained across time. That's what creates the long-term pull of more Americans into the economy. I think that's the role of the future of the American Community College.
Well, and obviously, as technology moves at such a rapid pace, people are going to also need to know how, along with their employers, to keep learning new skills over the course of their career, right? So this is kind of foundational to that as well.
Without a doubt. I think some of you are aware of the Workforce Pell proposal. I would encourage you to think about Workforce Pell as not only being just for adults without an education, but imagine the person with a baccalaureate degree who is displaced as a result of AI at some point. They will need to come back and be reskilled and re-educated to be able to continue in the economy.
Well, thank you. And to both you, Dr. Bradley and Dr. Sullivan, I've heard from some stakeholders who say WIOA reporting requirements are overly burdensome. State and local leaders devote significant resources to writing lengthy plans, which in some cases end up acting as more of a compliance exercise than a strategic project management tool. I've also heard that community partners are sometimes dissuaded from becoming eligible training providers because of WIOA's performance reporting requirements. So that can unintentionally, obviously, stifle innovation and the diversification of providers. So how do we strike the right balance between performance accountability and non-burdensome reporting requirements? And are the current performance indicators the right ones? And if not, what should we do? And we have about 20 seconds left, so we'll start with Dr. Bradley and Dr. Sullivan, and then we can follow up in writing. So
Yes, I'd be glad to work with your staff on this. I'll just point out one thing on the performance accountability, for example, because of your question about career pathways. The performance accountability measures in WIOA are based on exiting the system. Changing one of those or more indicators to keep track of the person as they go, to give credit to the providers that are following people, not just a one and done. So that would be one example, but glad to discuss further.
Okay, thank you.
I think the only thing I would add is people attend our colleges not for the credential, but for the paycheck. I think it's really important that we use those metrics that look at earnings and employment.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Senator Smith.
Thank you, Chair Sanders, and thanks to all of you for being here. It's a very interesting and important and timely conversation. And you know, Chair Sanders, I was thinking about your comments about going into this school in Vermont and having that palpable sense of energy and kind of connectedness and engagement. And it made me think about so many examples that I've seen in Minnesota of how those kinds of youth programs are really working. I'm thinking, for example, of the Career Academy in Moorhead, Minnesota. They literally, the school district took an old big box store and they retrofitted it to be a career training facility, and you know, focused on kids at the high school level, and connected with community colleges and also with employers in the region. And it had such a completely different feel, energy, excitement, lots of hands-on learning, lots of connections to local employers. So I think this is so important for us to keep in mind. And as I said, I've seen some really strong programs, and one of the things that I've noted also is that, you know, there is just this hunger for young people to understand what their options are. They don't even really know, like you don't know what you don't know about what you might be able to do. And so that's really the value behind a piece of legislation that I've been working on. It's bipartisan. It's called the Youth Workforce Readiness Act. And what it would do is actively support partnerships between community-based after-school programs, out-of-school programs. Think like what the Boys and Girls Clubs do, for example. Connecting those programs with schools and with employers to provide some opportunities for young people to get some real-world experience. This could be career exploration, or it could be mentoring, or even opportunities for young folks to earn some credentials for their first job. So Ms. White, my question is for you. Can you talk about these kinds of after-school or out-of-school programs and what role they can play in connecting youth at the high school level to, or even younger potentially, to what their opportunities are?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. I think what you've pointed out here is the importance of early exposure to careers into the career pathways that many of us have mentioned. I think that out-of-school time providers, after-school time providers can play a critical role in providing these exposure experiences, not just to high school students, but to students as early as middle school. Part of the reason that's important is because young people make a series of decisions very early on in high school that shape the trajectory that they take through high school, whether or not they complete high school, and even if they do complete high school, what options are available to them within the secondary school curriculum. One thing I would say that I think is really important, and I've had a chance to look at the act and think it's a wonderful idea. But one of the things I think many folks here have mentioned today, we often think about the public workforce system as distinct from our education system. We think about our high schools as distinct from our colleges. That does young people a disservice. They mature and they learn at very different rates. They have interests that develop at very different times. And so the more we can create bridges across these systems, whether that's out of school, directly into K-12 education, K-12 education, the CTE system, into work experiences, the better we'll be able to serve young people and allow them to move, earn credentials, gain exposure
I think that's right.
over the course of their lives and their secondary and post-secondary experiences. Dual enrollment has been mentioned. That's critically
Right.
important.
This is what's happening in this facility, this great program in Moorhead, where you have dual enrollment. I know this is happening all over the place, and I think, Chair Sanders, what we need to figure out how to do is to make sure that our WIOA programs are reinforcing this kind of innovation that's happening at the local level, rather than creating sort of a bureaucratic maze for organizations or students or educators or employers that want to participate to kind of make their way through.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
The one thing I would add to it too is that so much of this momentum that you're referencing is happening in schools, led by schools or out-of-school providers that work with public education. The WIOA system primarily serves students who are disconnected from that system. And one challenge that I think this population will have as programs, these in-school programs explode really, and I do think they will, is that those are not necessarily the young people that employers look to first. And we need to ensure that WIOA remains strong and continues to support programs for the students who face the greatest barriers to employment and may not have access to or maybe overlooked as some of these really excellent school-based programs evolve. Keeping them connected to those programs, using them as strategies for re-engagement, and ensuring that there are incentives in place for employers to work with these hard-to-serve kids is going to be a really important step to ensure that we can create these opportunities and really expand their benefit for all.
Thank you so much, Chair Sanders, and I will say this to Ranking Member Cassidy as well. This is a bill I have with Senator Collins and Senator Graham and Senator Wyden, and I hope that I'm going to be hoping that we can get this included in our bill. I have another question which I will provide in writing, focused on supportive services and just what a big deal it is if you don't have access to transportation or childcare or a little bit of extra training, what a big barrier that is to being able to keep or get a job. So I'll follow up with that in writing. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Marshall.
Well, thank you, Chairman Sanders. I want to start by offering a letter on behalf of Senator Budd. It's from the North Carolina Chamber regarding Pell Grant eligibility. So on behalf of Senator Budd, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter to the record a letter of support for his bill, the Promoting Employment and Lifelong Learning Act, from the North Carolina Chamber of Commerce.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, welcome to all of our panel and making the efforts to give us some advice here. I'm going to start with Ms. White. When it comes to youth apprenticeships, we grew up in an era where we all had summer jobs and part-time jobs. And when I go back home, employers tell me they have a hard time getting through the barriers of apprenticeships coming on board. Are there, instead of adding more regulations, are there some regulations we could tweak to maybe give those youth and other people more of an opportunity for apprenticeships?
Sure, I'm happy to take that. Thank you for the question, Senator. So I think to some extent the complaints from employers around registration for apprenticeship they are legitimate. I'm actually trying to register my very own apprenticeship right now. We are hiring one at my place of employment. And it can be challenging. I think many states have invested in state-level intermediaries that have provided really significant guidance to employers to expedite that process. They take on a lot of the administrative burden to sort of expedite kind of the creation of the program and the registration from start to finish. I think there are a number of ways that registration could be simplified and expedited. One thing I think could go a long way towards the expansion of these programs at the local and state level are program standards that develop through things like sector partnerships. Often the hardest part of building these programs is employers saying, I don't know how to put the pieces together. I don't know what a work process schedule it is. I don't know how to specify the skills and competencies that these folks need. I can tell you what they should do, but I don't know how to write it. And to the extent that we can create shared resources to help expedite that process for youth and for adults, I think we'll see greater uptake.
Okay, I'll go to Dr. Bradley next. One of my sayings, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And if you don't have the data timely, it doesn't do me any good. As we work through this WIOA authorization, we have a bill that would require the Department of Labor to implement performance indicators within 6 months of enactment and provide monthly technical assistance to local workforce boards. Can you just give me your perspective on the importance of that timely reports and implementations?
Thank you, Senator. That's an excellent question, and that's been one of the issues in the system is data lag. The reason that up-to-date, more real-time data is so important is because things change quickly, and you want training providers and workforce boards to be able to respond to what's happening now, not describing a situation 6 months ago. And also, in terms of understanding training providers that have positive outcomes, if there's a year or 2 years lag of that, and they're not a good training provider, they're not getting good results, you want to know that sooner rather than later because of the good stewardship of public dollars in the WIOA system. So it's really important both from an agility standpoint, but also to know what's working.
Thank you. Mr. Dickerson, my wife and I are community college graduates, so proud of my community colleges and technical colleges and their ability to flex from moment to moment. In a rural community where there's agriculture, one community college has the diesel mechanic school. Maybe where the wind energy is popping up, a community college quickly offers a 2-year degree in wind energy. And where there's manufacturing, maybe it's a focus on welding and other skills like that. How do you see the opportunity for short-term Pell Grants in those types of programs? Would that something that would be a good idea, short-term Pell Grants?
Yes, sir, I absolutely believe that'd be a great opportunity for our adult population to get into the workforce faster through certified programs. Now, the other part of that is, yes, the funding's available, but do you have industry leading those discussions and developing those programs on the other side of it? And I think that's a critical aspect that can't be overlooked. I'm proud to say Louisiana Delta Community College, which is our community college in Monroe in the northeast side of the state, work with industry often and become flexible in the short-term programs that we need. So I know that'd be a positive step for this relationship.
Thank you. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Chair Sanders, and thanks to all the witnesses. I'll just begin with you, Dr. Bradley. I'm only now starting to find a spirit of forgiveness in my heart for you for hiring Karishma Merchant away from my Senate staff. She's sitting there in the front row, but I am finding a sense of forgiveness after many months. I want to talk to Dr. Sullivan, and it really builds on Senator Marshall's questions about the importance of training services. Not everybody can access a 4-year degree or even a 2-year degree, but we also know that by 2031, more than 70% of jobs will require some form of post-secondary education or training beyond high school. And that's why I have long been a champion of expanding Pell Grant to include high-quality short-term education and training programs. One of the real virtues of the Pell program is how we've made it flexible over the years, full-time students, part-time students. I'm really happy that we recently, within the last 2 years, went back to an original part of Pell, which was folks who are incarcerated, who are trying to gain college and skills so that they can be successful. Once they are released, they can now qualify for Pell, and that's leading to some significant pickup in offering courses to those individuals. But I do believe the next expansion and flexibility of Pell should be for high-quality short-term education and training programs. Senator Braun on the committee, he and I have introduced the Jobs Act. We have over 45 bipartisan co-sponsors, including 10 on this committee. I want to thank Chair Sanders for agreeing that this will be marked up later this summer. Different community colleges have kind of embraced this notion in tandem with their own state legislatures and governors. Virginia Community College has a fast forward program to focus on state funding for these short-term high-quality programs, and the results have been pretty strong. Given your experience both in Virginia and Louisiana, can you speak to the value of these programs, sort of picking up on what Mr. Dickerson just said?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for your leadership around this issue. I know personally you have understood career and technical education for many years personally. You invested your own time in that space. Workforce Pell, I think, is a huge part of the solution of educating and skilling American people. The American worker today, the biggest issue they face is time. And so when we say to them, go get an associate degree, and they say, I don't have the time, what we should be offering them is an opportunity that gets them the skills to get to work, but that's not the end, that's the beginning. And ensuring that Workforce Pell allows those programs high quality, high value for that individual, that gets them into the work. But then we have our employer partners who we need help to pull people through that economy to make sure that as the jobs change, they're able to be educated and skilled and stay on top of that economy.
And I do acknowledge what Senator Marshall said. Our community colleges are often really flexible, so that Central Virginia Community College in Lynchburg, they offer different programs than J. Sargent Reynolds Community College in Richmond, because they're pretty attuned to the dynamics of the local, economy and local workforce needs. Let me ask and the last thing I'll just say on this is, I really celebrate work that we've done in the last couple of years to do an infrastructure bill. And I really celebrate work that we've done to do a manufacturing build. But who's going to build it? Who's going to make it? This is a challenge that I'm hearing from all my employers, so I look forward to working more on this. Ms. Taylor-Wright, a question about youth unemployment, just one more question. Young people who are disconnected from both school and work represent a critical pool of untapped talent and opportunity for economic mobility in this country. Some call this group of people disconnected youth, but I think the term that I've heard my colleague Bobby Scott use is opportunity youth, which I like. And I have legislation that would be similar to legislation he's promoted on the House, the Opening Doors for Youth Act, to expand employment opportunities for these young people who do not have a current connection either to school or employment. According to a recent report from the Center for American Progress, while the post-pandemic labor market has seen increased participation from young people ages 16 to 19, there's still millions that do face barriers to employment. How can WIOA better support young people to kind of reconnect to both education and the economy?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think the easiest answer through WIOA is the expansion of access to work experiences. They're been proven to yield results in the short and long term for young people's labor market outcomes. And I think to the extent that WIOA can be leveraged to create more of those paid work opportunities for young people, and to create incentives for employers to hire these young people who face significant barriers to entry to the labor market. That's one way to make sure that young people that are served by WIOA have access to these jobs. You're right, youth unemployment is at almost 9.5% right now, which is pretty high.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to keep going since they're talking. Does anybody else just want to say something about this youth employment and kind of the opportunity to better connect young people either to school or work?
I'll make one from an employer standpoint. In our conversations, we acknowledge work experience as valuable, apprenticeships as valuable. One challenge and one question I would ask our panelists and this committee to consider is there needs to be an education for business and industry leaders on how to effectively do that. Because we have some real challenges of bringing young people into our manufacturing facility. But we have opportunities, like we have a business academy in Northeast Louisiana that allows students to go into the business office setting, which is much safer environment than a manufacturing facility. And so considering some of those resources and those conversations, I think would be beneficial.
Great. Please, Dr. Bly-Jones.
I just want to build on that because I think we've talked a lot about adding additional funds for individuals. I want to accentuate the point that Mr. Dickerson just made in terms of resources to work with local employers. I think that's an important component. Oftentimes, local workforce boards are tasked with working with employers and don't necessarily have the additional resources to convene for those sector partnerships to educate employers on the best way to work with youth in those work-based learning experiences. And so I would elevate the point that was mentioned before, that we need the resources to actually help with some of those sector partnerships as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Marshall.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Bly-Jones, if we were to start a program like yours in Kansas City, Wichita, a bigger city, what would be the most important advice you'd give us? What would be the things to not do, perhaps?
So, again, thank you for the question and considering creating a jobs council in Kansas City.
Yeah. We probably have something like it, but I'm still just trying. I think that lessons learned are always good to go over.
I love the sound of it because it really is about systemic change and it is about coalition building. And so a lot of the work we do is in partnership. One of the things I want to echo, we've heard a lot about how separate our systems are. Really, WIOA is about integrating all of these systems. We talked about K-12, we've talked about adult ed, we've talked about individuals with disabilities. We talked about the stigmas that are attached to individuals that have criminal records. We've talked about the need for educators to be employed. Employers to be educated about how the system works and how they can best leverage this system for talent acquisition. So I would say to get the partners that are required in the workforce ecosystem, all of the partners that I've mentioned, and then think about your local economy and what those skills are needed to actually fill those jobs. We heard that there are a lot of jobs and there are a lot of people who are unemployed, and so making sure that we're skilling them up for the jobs that actually exist.
What would you say are the impediments to success? What is the most common reasons people drop out of this program you're outlining?
I think we talk about getting individuals jobs. I think we have to be mindful about quality jobs. I think we have to think about the benefits that come with employment, what it costs to maintain employment. We talked about the supportive services that are needed, whether that is the transportation or whether that is affordable childcare. Another crisis we have in the country now is mental health. And so even including that, when we talk about our youth and we talk about our adults and the trauma that individuals have endured, I think mental health is another component that needs to be included when we think about supportive services as well. So it's those wraparound services from the point of the person actually getting the job to actually keeping the job, the retention component.
Thank you. Let me ask kind of a simple question here. What has been brought up by a number of senators is the fact that we put many, many, many billions of dollars into rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, and yet we don't have the kind of skilled workforce that we need in order to move that as rapidly as we would like. What I've heard in Vermont, and I would like you to comment on this, is it's one thing to talk about giving people the skills, but to give people the skills, you need to have somebody who knows the profession. I can't teach them to be a plumber unless I'm a plumber or a good plumber or an electrician or whatever. And what I've heard in Vermont is, especially in the schools, to get somebody who has the skills out of the workforce to become a teacher becomes a whole project unto itself. Not to mention, if he's making $100,000 as a plumber, I'm going to pay him $50,000 as a teacher, he ain't going to do it. Is that an issue that we're running into around the country? Who wants to speak to that?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Sullivan?
I'll give an example. In Northeast Louisiana, we have manufacturing companies and other companies that are partnering with those school districts where they actually allow employees to take a couple of hours a day and go teach at a certain school district in that area. And that's what's happening
They're
at the.
paid by the employer, part of their job, in a sense.
That's right.
interesting.
They're allowing, and I think that's the model of partnership at the local level that we're seeing that I hope can be seen at the federal level is the work and the success is going to happen at the local level. The more of these conversations from local.
So let me get it straight. So you're working for me, you're a skilled worker.
Yep.
I'm going to pay you to go to a local school. You'll get your salary?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And what about the teaching skills? I mean, you could be a great worker, not necessarily a great teacher. How do you deal with that one? Yeah.
Transition largely for us is aimed at retiring individuals, maybe plumbers, maybe process operators.
Good.
As they retire out, we're bringing them into the college, and it takes time, right? We need to spend time with them to help them understand pedagogy and how to
Exactly.
teach.
All right. So you could be a great plumber, but not a great teacher.
Yes.
All right. Dr. Johnson?
I was just going to point to the gap in pay in terms of bringing a professional in, and it is best to actually recruit from those who are actually looking to retire soon.
Does
and wanna
Mr.
transition.
Dickerson's, if you have sympathetic employers, does his idea make sense to you, having an employer pay?
I think at the local community, that level of engagement is what I think you saw when you walked into that high school, the excitement that a young person or any person has when they're contributing to their local economy. So being able to work as a local employer and be able to contribute in K-12 or even the community college, that's what we're looking for in community investments.
I have the sense that at least in some school districts, what you are suggesting, which kind of makes common sense, somebody may say, well, you don't have the teaching certificates that you need or qualifications. Are we running in, is that a bureaucratic problem, or who wants to speak to that one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Well, I know while I was in the school district, we had the certifications to train up those teachers that would transition. But what I'm specifically talking to is more of a collaboration approach of, it might not be a person moving out of their career and into a career in education.
Right.
As much as it is, we're going to teach this class because we have a shortage.
Right.
And that's really the relationship at the local level.
Okay. Okay. Rep- What doesn't matter. No, Senator Romney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I was serving as governor of Massachusetts, Senator Markley State over there, I would hear occasionally some stories that gave me some concern. Let's say that a lumper in Massachusetts, by the way, you probably don't know what a lumper is, but this is a person who unloads a fishing boat and works in a canning factory, a fishing factory. And if this person lost their job because of overfishing or regulation or whatever, I'm not getting into that, but if they lost their job, they then were overwhelmed with the process of trying to get unemployment and maybe some housing vouchers and perhaps TANF, and then they needed job training because those lumping jobs are not going to come back. And I looked at how many federal job training programs there were. There were 49 at the time. And I would hear that a person that had lost their job was overwhelmed with the complexity of getting help. I mean, is that a real problem? Do people who are in one profession that maybe is going away and need help, do they have a hard time figuring out how to access the various government programs that might be available to them? Dr. Bly-Jones, do you have a thought on that?
So usually what happens, thank you for the question, usually what happens is it's a rapid response team that goes out, and they are notified at the state level when an employer is actually facing a layoff of individuals. And so a rapid response team is sent out to that employer to talk to individuals about the resources that exist. So it's at that time that they may learn about the different federal services that you mentioned. And so in theory, it would be seamless, and that is the intention. And then they go from there into what is referred to as American Job Centers that are located in most local communities, again, to be able to actually access resources.
But the job centers are not going to have TANF or housing vouchers or unemployment insurance, right?
No, they would have an individual you would talk to, and they would have all of those services there. It's considered a one-stop center.
Not at the job center. The one-stop center, that's what I'm getting to, which is a governor smarter than me, Mike Leavitt of Utah, had an idea, which is instead of having all these offices separate, the job training and the TANF and the housing and so forth, let's have one office. And let that one office help an individual that became unemployed. And that worked extremely well for the state of Utah. That unfortunately is prohibited under law at the federal level. We can't put those offices together. And only one state was grandfathered to allow that to occur, and that was the state of Utah. I have introduced a piece of legislation which is known as the One Door to Work Act, which would allow as many as 5 other states to be able to also do what Utah does, which is have a one-stop place where individuals can go to get help with unemployment, housing, TANF, food stamps, as well as job training. Mr. Dickerson, you come from Louisiana. Louisiana is one of the states that said we would love to be able to do that. And I'm delighted that, for instance, the ranking member and other members of this committee support this idea. Is that something which you believe would be helpful in your state?
Yes, sir. That's the work of our Louisiana Workforce and Social Service Reform Task Force that was put together by the governor and our Secretary of Workforce and Department of Child and Family Services as well. And it's both sides of it. It's not only for the employee, but also for the employer. But to your point, one challenge that we've heard in our conversations at the local level around the one-door policy is to make sure that those one-stop centers are appropriately staffed to accommodate all of those services, and that those staff members are educated so that when that individual does come in, they not only get access to the services, but the service delivery mechanism is there to meet them. And that's something we would support.
Yeah, excellent. I would just note one more thing, which is that Governor Levitt and the Utah program assigns a caseworker. As soon as someone becomes unemployed, they get a caseworker that begins helping them with everything from the support they need for safety net services, at the same time to lay out a plan for getting them back into the workforce and training. It's an extraordinary program working well in the state of Utah, and I'm delighted that the ranking member and others on this committee support this idea of letting at least 5 other states get the chance to try this on a temporary basis and see if it's working well for them. I know Louisiana, Texas, other states have said, please let us do this. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from 46 business groups and think tanks expressing support for Senate Bill 3825, Senator Romney's One Door to Work Act.
Without objection, Senator Murray.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Sanders, for having this really critical hearing. You know, when I was a young teenager, my dad got MS. We have 7 kids in our family, and the only reason we were able to get back on our feet was a workforce training job that gave my mom some skills to get a job. It really saved our family. So these are really important. And now, today, because Democrats passed laws that made generational investments in American manufacturing and infrastructure and clean energy, we are seeing historic job growth. And in every corner of my state of Washington, I hear from businesses who need more skilled workers to grow and compete, workers who want to learn new skills and start new careers so they can set themselves and their families up for success. And investing in workforce training doesn't just help build a strong economy from some statistical level, it really changes lives, and it helps people, working parents like my mom. That is exactly why I'm so passionate about doing a strong bipartisan reauthorization of our federal workforce programs. You know, Mr. Chairman, 10 years ago, I worked alongside my Republican colleagues, the late Senator Isaacson, to pass the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. Back then, just like now, we had a divided Congress with a Democratic Senate and a Republican House. We knew it wasn't going to be easy, but we also knew it was going to be worth it, and that we could make a real progress if we listened to each other and listened to folks back home and focused on where we could agree and what could actually make a difference for people. Now, no one got everything they wanted at that time, but in the end, we all got a bill that we were very proud of and a bill that was really helpful for workers and businesses and the economy. So there's no question in my mind that we can do that again. And it's way past time to build on that progress so we can keep our economy strong and put the American worker first, which is why this conversation is so important today. So I really appreciate us having this hearing. Ms. White, according to the National Center for Educational Statistics, just over 1 in 10 young people are neither enrolled in school or are working. Currently, WIOA requires 75% of funding for youth be set aside for out-of-school youth to get connected to the critical employment and training resources, services they need, but we have a lot more work to do. Can you talk to us about the importance of reaching out-of-school youth in the WIOA funding?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Senator Murray. You know, for out-of-school youth who have disconnected, the public workforce system is often their place of last resort. It's really their last lifeline to reconnect to training, to education, and to the labor market. And so under the current version of the bill, 75%, as you said, is required to go towards that population of opportunity youth. That introduction in 2014 has allowed for WIOA to serve more vulnerable youth than was previously possible under the prior bill WIA. I think legislation must retain a requirement that a majority of funds be devoted to the most vulnerable young people. At the same time, I don't know that there's a perfect flat number that works in every single community. There are communities that would like to and have found ways to dedicate resources to keep students connected to school rather than reaching them after they withdraw. So there are lots of interesting ideas out there around assigning priority for service frameworks that could help local workforce boards make decisions about how and when to intervene and how and when to serve young people that I think could be really effective and reflect the expertise of local workforce professionals. That said, I do think it's critical that we retain a very clear requirement on the percentage of funds that must go to that population.
Very good, thank you, I appreciate that. Dr. Bradley, we work to strengthen the quality guardrails in the 24 reauthorization. And the last several years have really shown us that we got more work to do. So as we work on this law 10 years later, what more can we do to strengthen the quality of the training provided, including through stronger requirements for eligible training providers in their programs?
Thank you, Senator. You're right. There's always work to be done on this issue. And I think that one of the things at JFF that we've learned, we talked to a lot of state practitioners, and I think there's some really good state examples. New Jersey is doing some great work in this area, Alabama, Minnesota, to kind of build in quality measures. You know, this is they're doing it at the state level, but lessons could be learned at the federal level. I think that regular ETPL update, more regular than exists now, which is part of the House bill. I think something akin to having states do like a college scorecard, but for the workforce system. And I also think that there are other steps you can take to, allowing locals, for example, to have more say about providers in their area. Right now, the eligible training provider list is set at the state level. So another thing that the House bill does that may improve quality is they have this contingent eligibility mechanism that would allow maybe training providers that have a promising practice and it could be high quality but may not have been around for a long time to sort of receive payment in a structured way, sort of as they meet performance outcomes. So that would be another kind of...
Is there a way to track those outcomes so we know that somebody got a quality training at a program?
There are, and one of the things that I think can help on that is that a lot of times wage records are used to track outcomes, and one of the things, specifying that there's a specific state agency that's sort of responsible for the back-end work on tracking outcomes because they have access to the wage record data, that would be another improvement. Glad to discuss further.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Tuberville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whenever I hear from my folks back in Alabama, workforce is top of their mind. We're struggling right now in our state, struggling to fill jobs, struggling to match up the right people with the right job, struggling to keep businesses open, struggling to keep costs affordable. It's a huge problem. Reauthorization of the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act will be a huge step in the right direction. I think we all agree with that. Now, I know my colleagues on both sides of the aisle have been hearing a lot about this issue. We've all discussed it, and people across the country have been speaking up, offering solutions. A lot of my colleagues have spoken up and presented their ideas, and I have one myself. I introduced a Workforce Data Act yesterday. This bill is simple. It was developed in coordination with stakeholders across the WIOA system, and it would help ensure these federal dollars are getting to the right folks. My bill would improve data sharing within the WIOA system and allow local boards and providers access to wage data from the unemployment insurance system. This would allow them to measure performance with better and more accurate measures of success. We will be able to determine which training is working and which folks are being helped by these programs. Pretty straightforward and simple. Hopefully we can do something with this. Mr. Dickerson, you started your career as a high school coach. I think we have a little bit in common. And thank you for your service, because teaching is a service, coaching is a service. Can you tell us about what employers are looking at from the WIOA system?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. And some of my fondest memories were as a high school coach, and there's a lot of lessons that can be applied into business as well. But from an industry standpoint, I think a partnership in our workforce development is what we're looking for. And I made a statement in my testimony that it's our time to really step up and help bridge that gap. But for too long and for too many years, especially since COVID, I think business and industries are spending more internal dollars on developing their own workforce because of the lack of participation from the external. And that's just not sustainable for a business in our budget. And so considering a strong partnership with our community partners, our local workforce boards, our community technical college system is what we would really be looking forward to.
Is the current system working?
I think there's challenges with the current system that make it difficult to be successful. I think we have some spotlights in Northeast Louisiana that I'm proud of to say that we are working, but not to scale and not to meet the demand of employers in our areas.
Yeah. You know, education is the opportunity for our kids in the country. And I heard even earlier about people that have lost their jobs, which is rightly so. Education all my life. Our education system has abandoned us in some degree. We need to do a lot more work with that. And I know I have 2 huge manufacturing plants in Mobile. We make commercial jets. We make ships and submarines. And they have gone out recruiting in McDonald's and Walmart to train people how to weld and how to do plumbing and electricity. Some of their best workers. We can't sustain our country like that. We can't do it. It's got to be done through the educational system. Too many of our kids go to 4-year schools that don't need to go. I've watched that. I was a part of that, and saw kids that come and get a degree in something that they could never get a job and had to go work at Walmart. So, Mr. Sullivan, why is WIOA funding having such a minimum impact on our broader workforce needs?
Well, I think it's important. Thank you for the question. I think it's important to note the funding level of WIOA. I think it was referenced at about $3 billion. Just for a sake of reference, the federal Pell Program is about $30 billion. So just let that sink in for a second about the scope and scale. Think about the number of colleges. Sorry, not sure that you can hear me here. Think about the number of colleges that are available and the ability to be able to scale, as you heard Mr. Dickerson say a few minutes ago, to ensure that everyone has that opportunity. I think that's where we've got to find a way. But, you know, the reality is there are very few people out of the 150,000 that we have educated every year in Louisiana's community and technical colleges that are funded via WIOA. That number is likely very similar to the number that you have in Alabama, somewhere around the 1,100 or 1,200 range.
Yeah, it's, we're in a tough situation, you know. I'm all for Pell Grants. I dealt with them for years with football players and all that. Problem is, I think they're misused, but we could use Pell Grant more for workforce development for kids that just want to specify on something. I think that junior colleges, obviously, there's a lot of things that we could do to help, but we just don't do it. We talk about it, we don't do it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We cannot solve our current significant overdose crisis without programs that support workers. This is why the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act demonstration grants funding workforce development programs in states, counties, and towns with widespread opioid use are so important. In New Bedford, Massachusetts, for example, this funding enabled 140 formerly incarcerated individuals to get training for high-demand jobs with a living wage in the maritime trade industry. As the public health crisis evolves with rising polysubstance use disorder and substances like xylazine finding its way into fentanyl, we have to fund these programs permanently. Mr. Bradley, in your testimony, you state that workforce development is essential to help every individual create and sustain a career that will enable them to support themselves and their loved ones. Why is it important for WIOA to fund programs that allow people impacted by substance use disorder to find meaningful, dignified, and well-paid work?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, it's important. I think you've hit on a key point here, which is that people who interact with the workforce development system are coming from all different circumstances, all different sets of needs, different sets of backgrounds, different sets of challenges and barriers. And one of in the programs that you're talking about, yes, that's right, the DOL did a couple of pilot programs, demonstration programs through the authority of WIOA in sort of 2018, 2019 related to the opioid crisis. And because of the flexibility that they had under the demonstration authority, they were able to move into this area. You know, I don't think opioids is like mentioned in the statute of WIOA, but when crises happen, DOL is able to direct some of its resources at the national level towards these. So I guess I would say that it's important to remember that not everybody coming into the system has similar challenges, similar needs. There needs to be some flexibility about the type of programming to meet them where they are.
Yeah, and Senator Romney was talking about the fishing industry in Massachusetts earlier, and New Bedford is the largest port in the United States, fishing port. And so this is the kind of program that is working to help people to be able to make a new life for themselves. Youth Build is a Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act program that serves over 5,000 16 to 24-year-olds who are not working and are not in school. The young people enrolled in Youth Build obtain a high school degree, learn trades by building affordable housing in their community, and gain fundamental job skills. These programs help kids get opportunities they were previously denied and give them the tools to build the pathway to their future. My Youth Build for the Future Act would support this crucial work by providing more funding that programs can use more flexibly. This program works which is why we need to provide enough funding for it by allowing Department of Labor funds to match AmeriCorps funds. Youth Bill will also need flexibility in spending funds, such as being able to provide meals to participants. We cannot expect young people to learn while they're hungry. So, Ms. White, why is it important to fully and flexibly fund Youth Build?
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Senator, from my home state. So as you mentioned, Youth Build provides critical training opportunities for young people who face really significant barriers to employment, and they provide a really important service to the communities where they're working and building homes. A big part of the flexibility that you mentioned, I think, is important because as we've seen in Youth Build, there are really positive short-term outcomes for young people. There's less evidence that over time those positive benefits are retained. And so many of the programs that are having really strong results today have been able to forge partnerships with community colleges, with TRIO programs, with AmeriCorps, with other organizations so that young people who complete those programs have a warm handoff to a clear next step. Flexible resources for Youth Build programs to continue developing strong partnerships with employers in their communities, connecting to apprenticeship programs and forging partnerships with community colleges and other education programs so those young people have a very clear and supported transition when the program ends will help ensure that Youth Build continues to be successful and increases the long-term benefits for its participants as well.
Thank you for your work. And Dr. Bly-Jones, could you talk about why it's important to have workforce training in the clean energy sector, this growth sector for our economy?
Thank you for the question. And so it's important, and I have to say, under the leadership of my governor, J.B. Pritzker, he signed into legislation, so we are actually using state funds for Clean Energy Jobs Act. And it is about making sure that we have renewable energy. And so it's also comprehensive. It's an example of the sector partnership that I talked about when I talked about working with contractors, talking about the communities that have been affected by pollution and making sure those individuals are a part of the skills development for those clean energy jobs that we will have in Illinois. In addition to that, we've also included the population that we referenced earlier, those returning citizens. So we're being intentional about the population. We're being intentional working on both sides of the equation with the job training program, but also with the contractors and subcontractors and the employment piece to make sure that we are not training individuals for jobs that don't exist, but that we're doing the match on the front end and ensuring that the employers are engaged with us throughout the entire process. And that's a true sector partnership.
Thank you for your good work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Brunn. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I come from a place in southern Indiana where I live in a town and a county that's got one of the lowest unemployment rates, both town and county in our state. We're the biggest manufacturing state per capita. We got a place called Ivy Tech that's that bridge between what should be done in high school like it used to be done, to where you don't need a bridge on basic skills. She just visited Sue Elsperman, who runs Ivy Tech Switzerland, and gave me some disturbing news that they've got a labor participation rate of 86%. Want to take a crack at ours? 63. So they do what I remember years ago, to where every high school was emphasizing career and technical education as much as AP, the pathway where I think has been oversold. It's also too darn expensive to boot. And I'm interested, have we really changed the dynamic so you don't need as much participation here? I want to give a shout out to the bill Tim and I got out there about the Jobs Act. We definitely need that flexibility to where Pell money can be used for that. But let's go back to the source of the issue. I was on our school board and found out that guidance counselors were stigmatizing against stuff we're talking about. And that's where it's got to start, with transparency, maybe a portal here, at least in every state. What are the high demand, high wage jobs so parents and kids can clearly see it? And then get establishment education behind it to where they're telling kids and parents what makes more sense, especially when you look at what the cost of a college education was 40 years ago compared to what it is now. A lot of times the end result is you get exported out of state to find a job with a bad degree or back into the basement. So I'd like each one of you to comment on, if we do all of this, we put more programs behind it. When I was in our state legislature 7, 8 years ago, we were spending $1 billion on 19 different programs, and none of them are really doing that much good. And the true solution is maybe not K through 6, but it's middle school through high school, when it's a bargain for education and getting everything lined up with transparency and proper guidance. We'll start with Ms. White and try to keep it to 30 seconds or so I can hear everybody's opinion.
Thank you for the question, Senator. So I mean, I think your point about alignment is spot on. I think that's something that has to happen between our middle schools or high schools and post-secondary training and education options. One thing I would emphasize, I had a chance to travel last year with a delegation from Indiana to the Institute in Switzerland, where there's a team right now. One thing I want to underscore about what's so different about that system is the employer leadership and the employer coordination. That's a really big difference. The employers are not just playing a role in hiring students for work-based learning. They are working hand in hand with educators to define that curriculum. And we need mechanisms in place to make that happen stronger and more rapidly.
Good point, because they were detached in Indiana from that equation. They just thought the system was going to produce it automatically. Dr. Bradley.
Thank you, Senator. Yes, I think, one, I agree with you that there needs to be some connectivity and continuity, and I think one of the ways, looking at successful dual enrollment programs. So when you're in high school, being dually enrolled in an institute of higher education, and students can start to understand what they might want to go into and start building the skills and abilities to do that. But you're introduced at a younger age, and there's a clear path forward. The idea is it doesn't just stop in 12th grade. You can see the future.
Dr. Sullivan.
Senator, thank you for your leadership, certainly on the Jobs Act. But I will tell you, I think a lot of what we've heard today is about blending what we have traditionally thought of in different frames of education. Things are different today. Even dual enrollment is effectively a blending of K-12 and post-secondary. What I would urge is a much less of a siloed approach, and an approach that allows individuals to have dollars to be able to go out and find the training that has the greatest value for them, but not to limit that to a one-shot deal. And a final point, do not drop benefits just because an individual gets a job. What we know is that there's a benefits cliff that is happening in this country that needs to be smoothed out, that allows an individual to get a job and keep those benefits.
Senator, I have 3 words that I'm going to use. I'm going to use awareness, coordination, and alignment. Aware of the actual occupations that exist in that local community, local economy. alignment with the actual systems that we've talked about. So talking about the employer, talking about the schools, the jobs, and all of those supportive services and coordination. Everything has to be coordinated. We've talked about this, we've talked about needing more resources, but the way to best utilize and leverage resources is to make sure they're properly coordinated.
Thank you. Mr. Dickerson.
Yes, sir. I want to talk about a couple of things that are, I would say, actionable that are happening in Northeast Louisiana. One conversation, you talked about the stigma between college-bound and career-bound education, and our belief and our message is that every student is a career-bound student, whether that's immediately after high school, 4 years, or 16 years when they complete high school, they're going to end up in our workplaces. And so we want to celebrate working in our area. The second thing is our sector partnership, the Northeast Louisiana Manufacturers Alliance and Consortium, is developing a website, because you talked about awareness, about careers in our area, but the manufacturing and really branding and marketing manufacturing in Northeast Louisiana. That's going to go live here in the next couple of months. But in that, I want to share one way that we're getting into the classrooms is through virtual 360 tours, where a student will have a library, teachers have a library of videos. They can tour our manufacturing facility and a dozen others without ever leaving their classroom, just to bring that awareness piece in.
Thank you. Very good.
Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just following up on that, and I wish that I had been there for the full scope of that question, but to the comments that you have made, Mr. Dickerson, I was reading an article from the Wall Street Journal just yesterday, and it's entitled, "Gen Z Plumbers and Construction Workers Are Making hashtag Blue Collar Cool." So, I mean, doesn't that get your attention? We spend a lot of money trying to figure out, all right, how are we going to attract young people into the trades? And the article goes on about a young woman who is an electrician in Cornwall, New York, and she's on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Did you see her recently atop a bucket truck, adding utility outlets to power poles, or fixing an electric panel in a water-damaged basement? And then we've got a plumber, 23-year-old guy out of California, who has a TikTok video of himself removing a water heater with a dolly. By the time he woke the next morning, it had 470,000 views. I mean, so, all right, people, let's pay attention to our young people, how they are communicating this. And they're looking at this, and they're seeing these are good jobs. These are not only jobs that can take care of a 23-year-old young person, but it's really good wages. And they point that out in this article, and how these young people are kind of blowing out the stereotypes. They talk about one young woman who wants to show that it's okay to be feminine in a male-dominated industry of welding, so she's in full makeup and mascara, whatever it is that takes. But I think these are good reminders to us that how we are able to reach young people about these career opportunities and why they truly are careers. This is not just a detour on your way to a college degree. These are jobs that everybody needs. You've got great people that want to be doctors and lawyers, but every one of them needs to have their toilet work in their house. They need to have their lights go on. They need their electrician. So how we make this real, I think, is so much of what we're trying to do with workforce development. I just came from a meeting with the Alaska Home Builders Association, and we're talking about really the housing crisis within our state. And it comes down to one thing. You've got builders, but they can't get the framers, they can't get the electricians, they can't get what they need. It's all workforce, workforce, workforce. So as we're looking to focus on the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, I'm one who's looking to make sure that we're advancing our legislation for that next generation, not thinking what it is that we think they should have, but what it is that is going to attract them, that's going to be able to provide for those jobs. I want to make sure that we're incorporating flexibility into these programs, because I come from a big state with big geography, low population, super high costs. Your transportation costs just are killers. But I'll tell you, one of the things that has been an impediment to our workforce training programs is they're all located in your cities, in your larger population centers. But I've got 80% of the state of Alaska, our communities are not connected by road, so people got to fly in. So it's not like they can go take a training class and then be at home dealing with their kids or spouse or whatever it is. So for us, what they're looking for are childcare, transportation costs. So how we can incorporate flexibility into these programs is something that I hope that you would all share is going to be a positive. That also is an attraction when it comes to young people looking to these training opportunities. I've talked, haven't allowed you more than 40 seconds now to say anything, but can any of you speak to how important it is to have flexibility?
I'm going to give you an
within
extra
these?
minute. How's that?
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Flexibility.
Thank you, Senator. That's a great question. I did not know. Did you say 80% of Alaskan towns are not connected by roads?
That is correct.
Okay.
It's either by water or by air.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Interesting and very costly.
Yeah, indeed. I would say, and just to go back to Senator Markey's questions about the flexibility, it's this, that people come to the workforce system with very different backgrounds, very different needs. We had a panel recently where workforce leaders from different cities came in, and they were talking about the workforce system being a barrier reduction system. And so, meaning that people are going to come in with different barriers and have different needs, and that there has to be some flexibility. Everyone doesn't get the same treatment, essentially. So I would say that's the importance of diverse populations coming in with very different needs and backgrounds.
I would just add it's not only a diverse population, but it's also federal regulations that we're all expected to follow with populations that are diverse, with goals that are diverse, and with timeframes that are diverse. And so it is absolutely necessary that we have the flexibility. And the final point is we all expect these programs and the training to be aligned with the regional economy. Federal guidelines align with the regional economy. So you can imagine that's threading a needle.
Right.
So looking for that flexibility is going to be key.
Do you think that the way things are structured currently, that we do have that flexibility? Government programs, by their very nature, are not inherently built to be flexible.
I'll jump in. Thanks for that question and expanding upon that. One of the areas of advocacy that the Chicago Jobs Council continues to advance is making sure there are barrier reduction funds and that the definition of supportive services is more expansive. So you talked
Would
about.
that include like childcare,
Yes, I was just going to say, you talked about childcare, you talked about transportation. We talk a lot about supplies for individuals, what they need to actually get to work. You talked a lot about construction. A lot of the equipment that individuals need can be very costly. And then the other component I mentioned earlier is even adding in the mental health piece. So expanding the definition of what supportive services actually are, and then making sure you have those funds allocated to actually reduce the barriers for individuals to be able to get to work. We talked a lot about fines and fees that keep people away from work too. A lot of work that we do at CJC is eliminating some of those barriers related to fines and fees that can inhibit someone from, they can have a suspended driver's license and can't get to work. So being able to address all of those things with a much more expansive definition is what we look to advocate for in terms of reducing barriers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Let me, I think you've had almost every member of the committee here, which tells you how important this issue is to people from all over the country, and I thank all of you for being here today. And this is the end of our hearing. For any senators who wish to ask additional questions for the record will be due in 10 business days, June 27th by 5 p.m. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 4 statements in support of workforce development. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you.